Your Honor, it does appear that Cam Donaldson has made his way into the Zoom, so all the witnesses are here and we're ready to go.
Okay, and it looks like the live streaming is working. Wonderful, we have everybody here. Do you guys see any participants that should not be in the courtroom or anything like that? If not, no worries, just want to make sure that's not an issue. Give me 1 second. All right, everybody, I think we're ready to go. We are ready to start the second round of the Summit Cup. If we could please have entries of appearances.
Yes, good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Molly Sue Harmon, and today I'm joined in this counsel by my co-counsel, or I'm joined in this trial by my co-counsel, Mr.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening.
Your Honor. Sorry, Your Honor.
That's okay.
Today we're here representing Cam Donaldson, who is here on behalf of his father's estate, Lou Donaldson.
Wonderful. And what's you guys' team name?
Yes, Your Honor, we are Mount Elbert.
Okay, wonderful. Just give me 1 second. All right, wonderful. And for the defense?
Good evening, Your Honor. Jenny Kaplan on behalf of defendant Karen Baja.
Good evening, Your Honor. Patricia Drennan on behalf of the defendant Karen Baja.
Okay, wonderful. And you guys' team?
We are Gray's Peak, and we've also prepared a notice of appearance. If it's okay, I can send it to you via the chat function in Zoom.
Sure, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and before we kind of get things underway, do any of these scoring jurors have any conflicts or recognize anybody that is an advocate in this round?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay, wonderful. So it looks like we have no conflicts. Alrighty, so with that, is the plaintiff ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Wonderful. All right, so at this point, I'm gonna have everybody sworn in. If you could raise your right hand and please indicate by saying I do if you swear to abide by the rule of this proceeding and conduct yourself in a manner that is honorable to this forum. Please say I do.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I would hope nobody would say no, but I just want to check. All right, thank you. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and call case number 082263, Cam Donaldson versus Karen Baja. Are there any housekeeping matters?
Yes, Your Honor. We do have a few housekeeping matters as well as some other matters to discuss before we get to opening statements today.
Okay, wonderful. And for the defense?
Just a few housekeeping matters, Your Honor.
Okay, and then I'm gonna go ahead and just ask real quick before we get underway, are the host witnesses ready to timekeep or have any questions about timekeeping before we begin that process?
All ready on that count, Your Honor.
Okay.
The defense is as well, Your Honor.
Okay, wonderful, you guys. You're just running the trains along here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with the plaintiff then, if you want to start with housekeeping matters.
Yes, Your Honor. First, we would just like to encourage you, because of this digital format, if at any point you can't hear us or see us, just to interrupt and let us know so we can adjust our technical issues.
No problem.
Your Honor, in the interest of time, we do request that all witnesses be assumed constructively sworn in.
That will be the case. That's fine for all witnesses.
And Your Honor, we would just like to confirm that the time will stop for objections.
That is correct, yes.
And Your Honor, we also would request that all objection arguments be constructively assumed to be out of the jury's presence, but that because of this digital format, we would be allowed to make them in open court today.
What I would prefer is if we can keep most objections, say what that objection is, and then if you think there's going to be anything that will contaminate the jury at that point, if you can just ask me to have that conversation outside the presence of the jury, and we'll proceed that way.
Yes, Your Honor. And finally, we would just like to draw your attention to some stipulations that the parties have agreed on before today's trial.
Sure.
First, the parties have agreed that damages are at issue and this trial is not bifurcated. And as such, the plaintiff will be offering evidence of damages throughout today's case.
Okay, and is that the defense's understanding?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, wonderful.
And additionally, you may hear some testimony by video from a man whose legal name is Exotic Bob, as well as potential reading of a deposition by a man whose name is Carl Bannister. Both of these parties are assumed to be unavailable for the purposes of hearsay today.
Okay, and is that the defense's understanding?
We do understand that both individuals are unavailable, but we may object to their testimony coming in later on in the trial.
Okay, and then we can address any objections as they come up. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. And we would like to bring it to your attention one fact from the complaint and the defendant's answer to that complaint. In paragraph 11 of the plaintiff's complaint, it is alleged that Lou Donaldson was reported missing on or about August 18th of 2012. And in her response, the defendant admitted to that. Specifically, she stated that the averments of paragraph 11 of the plaintiff's complaint are admitted. Your Honor, we just wanted to bring that to the court's attention today that Ms. Baja did admit to that.
Okay, is there any response on that or any clarification from the defense?
As I understand, the plaintiff is just stating that the defendant acknowledged in her answer that Lou Donaldson was declared missing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Nothing else from us then. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Then we can go ahead and move on from that. Anything else, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. We have agreed today to pre-admit the last will and testament of Lou Donaldson that is Bates marked as Exhibit 14, and we will enter it as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.
Okay, great.
And we have also agreed to exclude from evidence a form that is marked the Sheriff's Office Vehicle Maintenance Report form that is marked as Bates 17, and that will be excluded from evidence today.
You guys were busy before this trial. I like it. All right, that is fine by me. Is that the defense's understanding?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, great.
And that's all from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Okay.
Oh,
and
I'm sorry, I apologize. There is one other matter that my co-counsel, Mr. Chance Stewart, will take up with you today before we allow the defense to proceed.
Sounds good.
Yes, Your Honor. We've spoken with the defense and they anticipate they're going to call an insurance investigator to the, and we have that investigator's report as part of the record of this case. In that report, the insurance investigator details information that he alleges to have learned from an anonymous contact within hearsay as well as 403, and the defense has agreed to exclude. So we just wanted to put that on the record that the parties have stipulated to the exclusion of any evidence coming from that anonymous source.
Okay, and we did have a little bit of a glitch with your technology for a moment, but so from what I gather, there's an anonymous source in that report from the expert, and the parties have agreed to exclude any statements from that anonymous party. Is that accurate?
Yes, Your Honor. Any evidence that was gathered solely from that anonymous source and not through any other method, the parties have agreed to exclude that from this trial.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Thank you, counsel. Anything for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Just to add on, the plaintiffs have covered the housekeeping matters. There was one additional stipulation as to the admissibility of a photo that's included in page 47 of the packet. They've agreed that that's a photo of Tara, and that should be admitted as, or marked and admitted ultimately, which we'll do during the trial as Defense Exhibit A.
And is that the plaintiff's understanding?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, great.
That's it, Your Honor. Otherwise, we are ready to proceed to trial. Thank you.
All right, just give me 1 second, okay? All right, and we'll go ahead and start with the plaintiff's motions in limine.
Your Honor, we don't have any motions. We've covered them and we've agreed to the admissibility or the exclusion of evidence. So we have no motions in limine at this
Okay,
point.
so nothing in addition. Wonderful. Is that the same case for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
You guys, you're making this so easy on me. All right. Would you like a couple of minutes or anything like that before we dive into opening statements?
The plaintiff is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, defense.
Defense is ready as well. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, so what I'm gonna ask is we are going to leave the view as is in gallery view, but when one person is doing either an opening or closing, I just ask that everybody else shut their cameras. For the duration of trial, I obviously wanna see expressions and if you stand or whatever the case may be for objections and things like that. So for examinations, we can leave cameras on, but just for openings and closings, if that's okay with everyone. All right, and counsel, whenever you are ready.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. He's never coming home. Not I hope he comes home. Not I pray he comes home. He's never coming home. Those are the words of the defendant, Karen Baja, a woman who was fueled by a fear of divorce, fueled by a desperation to keep everything she had. Two things that on August 18th of 2012 became a deadly combination for her husband, Lou Donaldson. Now today you're going to learn about Lou. And Lou was a hardworking man from right here in Statesville. He built his way from the bottom up to the top and became one of the most successful businessmen here in town. But even with all of that success, Lou felt like something was missing. He wanted someone to share it with, someone to be there through the good and the bad times. And today you'll learn he completed that picture by marrying the defendant, someone he loved, someone he thought he'd be with forever. He took care of her. He created a life for her that most of us can only imagine. And together they created one of the world's largest private animal sanctuaries, Wild Wildlife. Now, Lou didn't do it for the money. Lou did it because he loved big cats. Animals that had been purchased as pets that never should have been. Animals that had grown too large and their owners couldn't take care of anymore. And they couldn't be released into the wild. Animals that needed a home. But no matter how much they loved the big cats, the love they had for each other, well, it started to fizzle out. You see, members of the jury, like so many marriages today, the Donaldsons' marriage started to unravel. Lou, he'd had enough, and he told the defendant he wanted a divorce, a decision he had no idea would turn deadly. You see, from the moment the defendant heard that word, divorce, the panic set in. The house, the money, the cars, the animal sanctuary, she was going to lose it all. He couldn't do that to her. She wouldn't let him do that to her. No matter who got hurt, no matter what it would take. Well, it took just 14 days, 2 short weeks from the moment the defendant heard the word divorce until she started to carry out a plan on how to kill Lou Donaldson. A plan on how to kill him, but more importantly, a plan on how to get away with it. On August 18th, 2012, Lou Donaldson disappeared, never to be seen or heard from again. And the defendant will tell you herself that he's never coming home. And on August 19th, the defendant, well, she's not out there looking for Lou. Instead, she's down at the sanctuary because she didn't trust Cam. She's taking a will, Lou Donaldson's will. a will that the defendant was desperate to get her hands on. Well, what about the next day? Surely by August 20th, she's out there looking for her missing husband. Well, instead, she's down at the sanctuary firing Lou's son, Cam, and taking over the sanctuary. Because for the defendant, it was business as usual. By the end of it all, the defendant had gotten exactly what she wanted. The house, the money, the cars, the animal sanctuary. Her plan had worked. So she thought. She didn't plan on all of the questions. Questions from people like Cam Donaldson. Now we're here today representing Cam, and you'll learn that he's Lou's son from his first marriage. Cam will tell you about the relationship he had with his dad and how close they were, how he knew his dad wouldn't just disappear, to not call, to not say goodbye, to not even send a letter. Cam knew something wasn't right, and for years he has waited for answers. Now, many say that a lawsuit is the search for the truth. That's why we're here today. That's why Cam has brought this lawsuit. Now, this is a special kind of case called a wrongful death lawsuit. Now, members of the jury, let me be clear. This is not a murder trial, as much as we wish it were. That's a job for the government. And instead, we're here in the civil system. And the civil system has its own rules and its own burden. And today we have to meet 4 elements. That Lou was dead, that Lou's death was caused by Karen's intentional conduct, that Cam has suffered damages as a result, and that it was Karen's actions that caused Cam's damages. Now we have to prove these elements to you by a preponderance of the evidence. That simply means more likely than not. We're confident that at the end of today's trial, after you have seen all of the exhibits and heard all of the testimony, that we will have met that burden. And to do that, we're going to put a few witnesses on the stand. First, you'll hear from Cam Donaldson. He's going to tell you about his relationship with his dad, how close they were, and how painful losing his father has been. He'll tell you a little bit about the relationship between the defendant and his father, how divorce was on the table, and that things were tense for the Donaldsons. You'll also hear from Taylor Pride, a licensed private investigator, who you'll learn Cam hired to look into the disappearance of his father. Now, Miss Pride's going to tell you that through all of the searching, they never found Lou. You'll also hear a little bit about the will and its authenticity and how it was unusually worded. The defense will likely call some witnesses of their own to try to dispute this. We expect you'll hear from the defendant herself, who will try to tell you a story of how much she loves Lou. But she knew he was never coming home. You'll also hear from Chris Renard, an insurance investigator. Mr. Renard will tell you that he completed his investigation by the book. Members of the jury, that means he did nothing less than he had to do, but it certainly means he did nothing more than was required. Now, I want you to listen closely throughout today's trial and keep 3 questions in mind. Who was afraid of divorce? Who was desperate to keep her lifestyle? And who resorted to deception? At the end of today's case, we are confident you will have learned the answer to all 3 of those questions is the defendant herself. That it was her fear of divorce and her desperation to keep everything she had that became a deadly combination for Lou Donaldson. And at the end of today's case, we're going to come before you and ask that you hold the defendant liable for Lou's death and that you make her pay for what she's done. Because Lou, well, he's never coming home. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. For the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. In August 2012, Lou Donaldson made the decision to leave his wife, Karen Baja, to make sure that the animals that they cared for and protected were in the best possible hands. He left them with her. The evidence will show that he wanted those animals to be in her hands and her hands alone. Karen Baja had nothing to do with the disappearance of Lou Donaldson. You heard the plaintiff in opening tell you that Mr. Donaldson is dead. There's no evidence of that. In fact, you're going to realize that he may still be alive today, because disappearance is not death and an accusation is not evidence. Now let me introduce you to Karen Baja. Ms. Baja, could you please turn on your camera? Karen Baja is a loving wife that came from humble beginnings, working hard to make something of herself. Together with her husband, Lou Donaldson, she pursued her passion for animals through wild wildlife, their big cat sanctuary. And when I say big cats, I mean lions and tigers, literally. It's not the most typical thing, but it's what she loves. She cares for those animals so much as if they were her own family. Thank you, Ms. Baja. There came a point in time in 2012 when Ms. Baja and Mr. Donaldson were having some marital problems, and he wanted to leave her. He wanted out of their marriage, and he wanted out fast. Divorce would take too long. So Lou Donaldson came up with a plan. He was a pilot who regularly bought and sold planes and often took trips without logging his flights. He knew that he could leave without a trace, head somewhere far away, and start a new life. So that's what he did. On August 18th, 2012, in the dark of night, Lou Donaldson went to an airstrip not far from where they lived, boarded one of his small private planes, and left Karen Baja and wild wildlife behind him. His van was found at that airstrip shortly after he disappeared. But Mr. Donaldson loved his big cats and the wild wildlife sanctuary. He wanted to make sure that his lions and tigers were taken care of after he was gone. He didn't want the big cats and wild wildlife to fall into the wrong hands. So he left behind a will, and that will left everything to Ms. Baja. Let me show you that will. Notice the language in it. Mr. Donaldson left his real and personal property to Karen Baja. That would include the big cats and wild wildlife, if he should die or disappear. Die or disappear. Why did he include that word, disappear? Because the evidence will show he knew he was leaving. He knew, and he was planning ahead. He was leaving Ms. Baja, but he also knew how responsible she was and how much she cared for their animals. He wanted the cats taken care of, and the only person that could do that was Karen Baja. You may also notice that the plaintiff is not mentioned in this will. The plaintiff couldn't live with that. And so the plaintiff is here today claiming that Ms. Baja killed Mr. Donaldson and suggesting that she made a new will. But what evidence is there that Ms. Baja killed Mr. Donaldson? Evidence of a struggle? No. DNA evidence? No. An eyewitness account? No. A weapon? No. In fact, you will learn that the official police investigation into Mr. Donaldson's disappearance is still open. The plaintiff's case rests entirely on the testimony of a hired private investigator named Taylor Pride. The plaintiff will have Taylor Pride testify today that the signature on this will was not made by Lou Donaldson. But the plaintiff never told you in their opening that Taylor Pride is not a credible handwriting analyst. Taylor Pride took a 2-week course on handwriting analysis 18 years ago. Taylor Pride has never been published in handwriting analysis. Taylor Pride has never taught a course in handwriting analysis. Handwriting analysis is a specific area of expertise which Taylor Pride does not have. So when you hear Taylor Pride's testimony today regarding Mr. Donaldson's signature on the will, remember, Taylor Pride is not a credible handwriting analyst. The plaintiff has the burden of proof in this case. They must prove by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning that it is more likely than not 4 things. 1, that Lou Donaldson is dead. 2, that Karen Baja caused his death. 3, that the plaintiff suffered as a result. And 4, that Ms. Baja caused the plaintiff's suffering. You will learn during the course of this trial that there is no such evidence. All the plaintiff has is a disappearance and an accusation. But disappearance is not death, and an accusation is not evidence. Members of the jury, at the end of this case, we will ask you to find Karen Baja not liable for the wrongful death of Lou Donaldson. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right, and we can have people turn their cameras back on. All right, and we are going to go ahead and get started with the plaintiff's case in chief. Who would you like to call first?
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Cam Donaldson to the stand.
Okay. And Mr. Donaldson, you've been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Cam Donaldson.
Cam, can you tell us why you're here today?
I'm just here to, for justice and to find out the truth about my dad's disappearance.
Can you tell us your dad's name?
My dad's name was Lou. His name was Lou Donaldson.
Can you tell us a little bit about your dad?
Yeah, my dad was a pretty quirky guy. We worked together every day. We grew real close. I just really miss him.
Can you tell us what kind of things your dad liked to do?
Sure. My dad worked himself from the bottom all the way to the top. He started off selling cars, and before you knew it, he was a millionaire. He loved flying. He loved tigers.
Can you tell the jury what you mean by tigers?
I mean tigers. He loved tigers. He loved big cats. He founded the Wild Wildlife Sanctuary because he recognized that people were taking in these big cats as pets, and they wouldn't be able to be released back into the wild. And he wanted to make sure that there was a place where they could be cared for.
And what, if any, kind of involvement did you have with the sanctuary?
My dad used to joke that I knew more about the business than he did. I ran the books, answered the phones, wrote the checks. I did it all.
Now, Cam, you mentioned your dad disappeared. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'll never forget. It was August 17th, 2012. Never heard from him or saw him again after that.
Now, Cam, who told you your dad was missing?
Karen Baja told me.
When did she tell you that?
It was just a few days later. I believe it was on the 19th.
Now, Cam, when was the last time you saw your dad?
It was normal. It was on the 17th, August 17th. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He asked me if I wanted to come over to dinner for that following Sunday. And then, just another weekend. He told me he'd see me that Monday. Nothing unusual about it.
Now, Cam, you said Karen told you your dad was missing. Who is Karen?
Karen was my stepmother, and she's the defendant in court today.
Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between your dad and Karen based on what you've observed?
Sure. They got married a long time ago. She was hitchhiking, and my dad was, nice enough to pick her up, and she kind of latched on from there. Uh, everything was fine until recently.
Can you what you mean until recently?
Yeah, well, things just kind of started going downhill. My dad told her that he wanted a divorce.
And Cam, how did you learn about the divorce?
I was in the office one day, and I overheard them shouting about it. And then Karen stormed out. And then my dad came up to me visibly shaking. I'd never seen him like that before. And we talked about it. And, he told her that he wanted a divorce.
Now, Cam, did your dad say anything to you that day?
Objection, Your Honor. If I may proffer constructively outside the presence of the jury,
Sure.
I believe this question may call for inadmissible hearsay when opposing counsel refers to whether or not Lou Donaldson said anything else that day. Specifically, I think she may be eliciting that he said, if anything ever happens to me, look at Karen Baja.
Okay, response.
Yes, Your Honor. There should be a hearsay exception under 8033 as to the then existing mental condition of Lou Donaldson and his fears, his worries at the time.
Any further response?
Yeah, Your Honor, we would argue that if anything ever happens to me, you should look at Karen Baja. It does not fall under 8033, the state of mind exception. That's more something, a fear, a concern, not a look at someone else, not as she's the person who did this. So we would argue that it does not fall under that exception to the hearsay rule.
I'm not necessarily persuaded, counsel, that this is 8033, but you did lay foundation about the emotional state of Mr. Donaldson at the time that he made this statement. So I'll give you a little latitude pursuant to 8032, but counsel, certainly if the statements continue to go beyond that, or you think that there are further hearsay issues, just make sure to raise an objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Cam, I'll ask you again. Did your dad say anything to you when he came up to you that day?
Yeah, he told me that if he ever went missing, that I should tell the police to look into Karen.
Do you know why your dad would say that to you?
Well,
Objection, Your Honor. That question calls for speculation.
Response.
Your Honor, I'm not asking him to speculate. If I'm allowed to ask the witness this question, he will give a specific instance of a statement that he heard.
At this point, I do believe it's speculative. If you want to lay a little bit more foundation about his personal knowledge about how he would know how his father was feeling, then we can go ahead down that path, but I'm going to sustain at this point.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll rephrase. Cam, did your dad ever tell you anything that made you believe why he was afraid?
yeah, when my dad asked for a divorce, Karen told him that she would kill him.
Objection, Your Honor. We would ask that that statement be stricken. It's inadmissible hearsay.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. This is a double layered hearsay. First, the statement, "I will kill you," that's an admission by a party opponent, and it is not inadmissible hearsay. As to the second layer, from what Mr. Donaldson told to his son Cam, that also falls under 8033 as to a then existing mental or physical condition as to the emotional state of Mr. Donaldson at the time.
Response.
Your Honor, 8033 is, I believe, primarily used for forward-looking statements, which is not what this is. If anything ever happens to me, I think it was Karen. And in addition, the plaintiff did not actually overhear this happening. She, as opposing counsel pointed out, was allegedly told it. So we would still argue it does not fall under that 8033 exception.
At this point, counsel, I'm struggling a little bit. I don't think the second layer of hearsay has been overcome. Certainly, you can continue to refer to his belief that if something happened to him, that it was Ms. Baja who was responsible, but her direct quote is going to be kept out at this point. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. We'll move on. Now, Cam, when was the first time you saw Karen after your father went missing?
It was about 6 a.m. on the 19th. The alarm went off at the office, and I live close by. So I drove up there, and I saw that the lock had been cut off the gate. And when I entered, Karen and some man were standing there holding the lockbox from my desk, and then the police drove in right after.
And Cam, based on what you observed, how did Karen seem?
Well, when I saw her, she was standing there with this smile on her face, and to me, it felt like she thought she got away with something.
And Cam, did Karen say anything to you?
She said she won, and
Objection, Your Honor. I fear this might not be the appropriate way to say that, but I believe that's outside the scope of the packet. I believe, if I could proffer, I believe that it was the plaintiff's impression that that was what had happened, like she was alluding that, but I do not believe a statement was made.
What I'm going to go ahead and do with this, counsel, based on that objection, I'm going to let that be fodder for cross-examination if you don't believe that that was actually said. But unless you have any other objections, I'm going to go ahead and overrule.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Cam, you mentioned Karen was holding a lockbox. Do you have any idea what was in that lockbox?
Yeah, my father's real will was in the lockbox.
Cam, how do you know that?
Well, my father was, he made me the executor of the will. And, you know, given the type of business that my father was in, you know, tigers and everything, it was kind of a dangerous line of work. And so I kept it in my desk to make sure that I had access to it. And, you know, that should I ever need it, that it would be available.
Now, Cam, based on your knowledge, how is that will different from the will we saw earlier today?
Objection, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is asking a question about something that is not in evidence, an alleged other will, and asking the witness to testify to the contents of that document.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. It is our belief that the defendant has made it impossible for us to have a copy of that will. And also, Your Honor, this is a document of independent legal significance. The witness has testified that he was an executor of this will, so he would have personal knowledge of what that will's contents were.
Okay, good objection. I'm going to give a little latitude for him to talk about the differences at this point, and you're telling me today that it does not exist. We have no copies of that or anything like that.
No, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead and proceed.
Cam, I'll ask you again. Based on your knowledge, how is that will different from the will we saw previously?
Well, the real will left 25% to Karen, 25% to my mother, 25% to the foundation, and 25% to me. And the will being presented today leaves all of it to Karen.
That will that you refer to as the real will since?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Yes, I'll ask again. Cam, have you seen the will that you call the real will since the day you saw Karen?
No.
Now, Cam, you mentioned that you believe your father is dead. How do you know that?
Well, there's a few reasons, really. Me and my father were really close. It's been so many years, and to not, get a phone call, a text, a letter, he's just gone. That's so unlike him. And, his glasses.
Cam, can you tell us what you mean by his glasses?
Well, they were found in the van. My dad was blind as a bat. He wore the same pair of glasses since I was in high school. There's just no way that he could fly without his glasses.
Cam, is there any other reason you believe your father to be dead?
Karen had the probate court declare him dead.
Now, Cam, based on your observation, did Karen ever appear to grieve your dad?
No.
Based on what you observed, did Karen ever go look for your dad?
No.
Cam, based on what you know, what is the first thing Karen did after she had your father declared legally dead?
Karen ran to the bank and cashed out the $5 million life insurance policy.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-exam.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Donaldson, you mentioned that your father and Miss Baja had argued,
That's correct.
but you never saw a physical altercation.
I didn't see one, but I did hear it.
But you never saw a physical altercation.
That's right.
And you never saw any evidence of violence.
That's right.
And you didn't see Miss Baja physically hurt your father.
That's correct.
And you mentioned that your father flew planes.
He did.
And he owned planes.
Yes.
And you would agree that he bought and sold planes all the time.
Yes.
And that he rarely properly registered those planes.
That's right.
And you didn't know how many planes he had.
That's right.
And you didn't know where he kept all of his planes.
That's correct.
But you did know that his pilot's license had been suspended.
Yes.
And you would agree that he occasionally flew without logging a flight plan.
That's right.
And you mentioned that when you last saw your father, he didn't tell you he was planning a trip the weekend he went missing.
No, he told me he'd see me that Monday.
So he didn't tell you that he was planning a trip or not.
He did not tell me he was planning a trip.
But you don't know whether he went flying that weekend.
That's right.
And when your father did take a trip, the cats would still need to be taken care of. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Miss Baja was the co-owner of Wild Wildlife with your father.
Yes.
And she typically took care of the cats.
That's right. I mean, there was a lot of employees there, but, she definitely took care of the cats.
So she did take care of the cats.
Yes.
And Mr. Donaldson, your father, knew that.
Yes.
So Miss Baja did have responsibility for taking care of the cats whenever your father wasn't at Wild Wildlife.
Yeah. I mean, we never really had defined roles per se, but she definitely took care of the cats.
So you would agree that she took care of the cats when he wasn't in town or on a trip?
Sure.
Now, directing your attention to August 19th. According to you, the alarm at Wild Wildlife went off early that morning.
That's right.
And as a result of the alarm going off, you went to the office.
That's correct.
And the police responded as well.
They were there as well, yes.
And according to you, the padlock on the chain of the front gate was broken.
That's correct.
And you said that when you responded, you saw Miss Baja there.
Yes.
And that she was with someone else.
That's right.
And you said that she was carrying a lockbox.
Yes.
Your impression was that Miss Baja had broken in and stolen the lockbox.
Yes.
But you would agree that Miss Baja actually worked at Wild Wildlife, right?
That's correct, but she didn't have access to my desk, which is where the lockbox was kept.
So you would agree that she did work there and have access to Wild Wildlife.
Yes, she had access to Wild Wildlife, not my desk.
And you would agree that there were times when either you or Mr. Donaldson wasn't there that she was able to go into the office.
Absolutely.
So she had keys to the office.
Sure.
And she could come and go into the office whenever she wanted.
Sure.
And you would agree that the lockbox was in a desk drawer.
It was in my desk.
So the lockbox was in your desk drawer.
That's right.
And the drawer was locked, according to you.
Right. She did not have access to my desk.
So the drawer was locked.
Yes.
And you're saying that you saw her with the lockbox that night.
Yes.
But you would agree that there was no damage to the locked desk drawer.
Sure.
Now let me get this straight. According to you, she broke into the office, but unlocked the desk drawer to get the lockbox.
That's right.
Because you agree that she had access to the office.
She had access to the office.
And that means that she had access to the lockbox.
No, again, the lockbox was in my desk. Karen Baja, her role at the Wild Wildlife Sanctuary was mostly interacting with the cats. She didn't do any of the supervisory requirements. The only time I really saw her in the office was when her and my father were fighting about a divorce. I'd never really seen her in there prior. She didn't have any business to be in there. She didn't do any of the things that required her to be in there. How she got in there, I'm assuming a key, but I couldn't tell you conclusively. And how she got in my desk, again, I couldn't tell you conclusively, but she did not have access to my desk.
But you do agree that there was no damage to your desk drawer.
I do agree.
And you also agree that you allegedly saw her carrying a lockbox.
I did. I saw her carrying the lockbox.
Meaning that she did have access to your desk drawer.
She gained access to my desk drawer.
But you agree that there was no damage to that drawer.
There was no visible damage. You have to remember, at the time that I went to the sanctuary, I was just informed that my father was missing. There was all of this chaos going on. I didn't really examine my desk, and then I was fired, a few hours after. So I didn't really have access to go, look into it. Do I recall from so long ago whether there was damage to my desk? I do not. But did I really look? I did not.
So you would agree, as far as you knew at the time, there was no damage to your desk drawer.
That's right.
Now, that morning of August 19th, the police arrived right behind you.
That's right.
So there was at least one police officer there with you.
That's right.
But you can't tell us his or her name.
That's right. This was years ago.
And they're not here in court with us today.
That's right.
And there's no report that documents this.
I'm sorry?
There's no report that documents this incident that you described.
Not to my knowledge.
And you never confronted Ms. Baja about what you claim to have seen.
We've had our back and forths. I don't remember the exact context of our conversations, but we've definitely spoken through people anyways.
So you would agree that you never confronted Ms. Baja, or you have confronted Ms. Baja?
Specifically on the issues, I wouldn't say necessarily confronted, but Ms. Baja knows how I feel.
So you would agree that you never spoke with Ms. Baja about what you claim to have seen on August 19th?
No, not directly.
And Mr. Donaldson, you worked at Wild Wildlife.
That's right.
And Ms. Baja fired you after your father disappeared.
That's correct.
And you haven't worked there since.
That's right.
You last saw your father in 2012.
Yes.
But you didn't hire a private investigator until 2017.
That's right.
After you were made aware that his last will and testament did not include you.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. This witness may be excused. Do you have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Taylor Pride to the stand.
All right. Ms. Pride, you've been previously sworn, and you may begin.
Ms. Pride, could you just go ahead and introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Taylor Pride. That's Pride.
And what is it that you do for a living?
I'm a private investigator, and I'm a forensic document examiner that specializes in handwriting analysis.
Okay. And how did you begin your career?
So I worked for the police department for about 18 years. First couple years I spent just kind of on patrol, and then spent the last 16 as a detective. And in those 16 years, I spent about 6 years on the economic crime unit, where I really did a lot of handwriting analysis.
So how was it that you transitioned from being in the police department to being a private investigator today?
So after about 18 years with the department, I decided to start my own firm, and I did that in 2016.
Now, when I first asked you what you did for a living, you also said something about being a forensic document examiner. What exactly is that?
So a forensic document examiner is charged with evaluating documents to see whether they're authentic or not. And to do that, it often requires either looking at handwriting or signature samples to determine the authenticity of a document, or determine whether it's a forgery or not.
Now, what kind of training do you have to go through in order to be a forensic document examiner?
Well, myself, I'm board certified, and I also went through a seminar, and I do continuing education every year, and I actually get recertified every 4 years. So I've done that a number of times as well.
Have you ever come to court to testify?
Yes, I have. I think about 15 times or so now.
And when you come to court, have you been certified as an expert in forensic document examination?
Yes, I have been.
Have you ever had a situation where you weren't allowed to testify as an expert?
No.
Now, Ms. Pride, without actually telling us what your conclusions might be, did you reach conclusions in this case?
I did. Yeah, I reached a couple of conclusions.
Did you have enough materials, enough evidence with you in order to make sure that those conclusions were reliable?
I did.
What kind of materials, what kind of evidence did you have?
I reviewed all the evidence available in the case here. I reviewed documents like the will that Karen Basia presented, and I also reviewed Chris Renard's report as well.
Okay. And when you went about doing your investigation and looking at all that evidence, did you reliably apply everything you learned from your training and your certifications when you went about that?
Yeah, I did.
Ms. Pride, do you think your conclusions might be helpful to the jury in this case?
I think so, yes.
Your Honor, at this time we offer Ms. Pride as an expert in forensic document examination.
Okay, and is there any objection or voir dire from counsel?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, she'll be so tendered. You may proceed.
Ms. Pride, were you able to take a look at what's alleged to be Lou Donaldson's will in this case?
I did, yes.
Ms. Pride, we're going to take a look at that will. Your Honor, I'm now about to display what's been entered as Plaintiff's 1, the alleged will of Lou Donaldson on screen.
Okay.
Now, Ms. Pride, I want to start by taking a look at this statement right here where it says, if I should die or disappear. Do you see that?
Yes, I do see that.
Ms. Pride, how many wills have you looked at over the course of your career?
I mean, hundreds.
That phrase where it says, or disappear. Have you seen that before?
Only on this will.
Now, I also see right there, there's a signature from Lou Donaldson. Did you take a look at that signature?
I did, yeah, I analyzed that.
Now, when I asked you what kind of materials you looked at in this case, you said you looked at a report by Chris Renard. Do you remember looking at the signature comparison report from Mr. Renard?
I did, yes.
Now, the bottom 2 signatures on that report, did you use those in coming to your conclusions in this case?
I did, yes. I used those same signatures.
Well, Ms. Pride, I understand that you have an electronic notebook in front of you with all the exhibits, and I'd like to direct you to what's been Bates number 7. It should be that report. Can you let me know when you're there?
It's numbered 7. I apologize. That's page 7 of the packet.
It should be Bates numbered 7. It should be just below Mr. Renard's report, and I will get you that page number in just a moment. It should be on page 40, Ms. Pride.
Thank you. I am there with you.
Okay, is that the report that you looked at?
Yeah, this is the same report from
And those
Renard.
bottom 2 signatures, are those the ones you used in your analysis?
Yes, yeah, the one from his driver's license, and then the one that was on that last will that I determined was a forgery.
And does anything about that report look to have been changed or altered?
No, this is the same report.
Your Honor, I had a previous objection. I don't think my microphone had been turned on. My apologies.
Oh, that's okay. We gotta love technology, right? What was your objection?
I had objected to a statement that the witness had just entered onto the record pertaining to the will in question being a forgery. I object on the basis that to say something is a forgery draws a legal conclusion, and in this case, that is best left for the jury.
Response?
Your Honor, that's not a legal conclusion in this case. This is not actually a forgery or fraud case. This is a wrongful death case in which the elements are whether or not the defendant wrongfully caused the death of Lou Donaldson. This is just evidence, circumstantial evidence that incriminates the defendant, specifically incriminating behavior that she engaged in afterwards. And certainly as a forensic document examiner and an expert, she's allowed to give her opinion that this is a forgery.
And I agree with that, counsel. I think at this point, given her tender, she is allowed to opine in her personal or her expert opinion that this is in fact a forgery. And certainly on cross-examination, you can attack the credibility of that finding.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And Your Honor, at this time, given the foundation that's just been laid, we'd ask to enter what's been Bates numbered 7, the report of Chris Renard, into evidence as plaintiffs 2.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, there is an objection as to a portion of this document. There is a portion at the bottom of the document that does contain excerpts from a report that would be inadmissible hearsay in this instance.
Okay, and what portion exactly?
The written portion.
Okay, and response?
Your Honor, I just want to be clear. We're referring to the section that begins with notes and then ends before the signature of Chris Renard.
Okay.
Is that what's at issue?
And I guess, counsel, is that what you're referring to or what you have a problem with?
Excuse me, Your Honor, I'll pull up the page. Yes, Your Honor, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Defense counsel has no issue if you would like to constructively redact the report, but we do object on the basis of inadmissible hearsay under that notes portion.
Okay, response to that portion.
Your Honor, we're happy to redact that from the document. We don't intend to display it to the jury or argue its contents in front of the jury today. However, we would note that some of the statements in this report are simply conclusions that the defendant's expert has drawn. And we would ask that he's allowed to testify as to those conclusions once he takes the stand, but we're not going to show the jury that section of this report.
Okay, so since you're in agreement, counsel, what we will do is constructively redact that portion, given the constraints of this forum, and then subject to that condition, it will be admitted into the record.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Pride, I'm about to put on screen those bottom 2 signatures that you said you looked at. So when you went about examining the signature that appeared on the alleged will, where did you start?
Well, I looked at the signature that I found on the will, but in order to determine or to analyze whether it was an authentic signature or not, I had to first find samples that I know to be authentic. So I identified some authentic samples of Lou Donaldson's signature, including this driver's license signature here, so that I could then compare that to the signature on the proposed will.
And when you started that comparison, were there any letters between the 2 signatures that appeared to stick out?
Yeah, there was a few letters that really stuck out to me. The capital L on Lou, you can see on the sample signature, the driver's license that we know is authentic. The top loop is far smaller than the top loop on the capital L in the will signature. And then you can also see that O right next to it in Lou. There's sort of this weird double loop in the middle of that O that is not present on Mr. Donaldson's authenticated signature from the driver's license. And then another O that stood out to me for different reasons was the last lowercase o in Donaldson. And you'll note on the driver's license signature that it's not really a round circle. It's what we would call maybe like a ghost letter or a lazy letter. When you're writing a signature real fast, sometimes people skip, right? And that O looks a little bit more like a line. It's not a clearly defined O. But in the signature from the will here, you can see it's like a very careful O with a little loop, much, much more pronounced and defined than Lou's authentic signature.
So after looking at those individual letters, was there anything looking more at the signatures as a whole that you found?
Yeah, there were a couple of things in general about the signatures I thought really odd. The signature from the will, with a trained eye, you can tell that the pen was picked up and put back down a number of times while signing. But in Lou's authentic signature, like in the driver's license, you can tell that the pen was hardly ever picked up. So it was touching the surface of the paper while writing the signature. So that was really inconsistent. Usually a person will be consistent on how often they pick up the pen when they're writing. And then there was another thing that is, I think, a little bit more easier to pull out, even as somebody who's not trained in handwriting.
What was that?
So on that signature on the will here, it's very messy. It's a sloppy signature. You can tell all the lines are quivering. They're just, they're blotchy, they're heavier handed in some points and lighter in others. It looks more like there was a struggle, or, it was written more slowly. Whereas, on Lou's driver's license signature, it's smooth and even, and there aren't any quivering lines.
Those quivering lines, were there that you can pick out for us where you found that to be particularly evident?
Yeah, so the capital D on Donaldson, you'll note there's sort of a ink blot where the line starts, and then it's just the whole D is very amorphous. And then the lowercase l and lowercase d in Donaldson too, you really can tell there's just a bunch of wiggle happening on both of those lines, where that's absent in Mr. Donaldson's authentic signature from the driver's license.
So Ms. Pride, after you picked up all of these differences between the verified signatures and the signature that appears on this alleged will, what kind of conclusion were you able to come to?
I concluded that Lou Donaldson did not sign that will. That's not his signature.
Ms. Pride, when I first asked you about this case, you mentioned that you investigated the disappearance of Lou Donaldson. What kind of things did you look into in order to go about that investigation?
Well, there was this theory floating around that he had taken off on some airplane to Costa Rica. So I followed up on that. I investigated whether that was really a feasible possibility. And I found that just didn't add up based on the evidence.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes, counsel.
This theory that the expert has just referred to, that would be based on inadmissible hearsay.
Okay, in response.
Your Honor, we haven't offered any statements onto the record. These conclusions are based on her rationally based perception of the evidence that she found in her investigation. And we're actually about to walk through what that evidence is that led her to that conclusion. And that evidence is not going to be hearsay evidence.
Given that we're at the beginning of this line of questioning, I'm going to give a little bit of latitude, but certainly re-raise any objections if you think there's more hearsay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So Ms. Pride, as you were looking into this, were you ever able to see any of Lou Donaldson's bank records?
I was, yeah, I reviewed his bank records.
Now, I understand that you still have that electronic notebook in front of you. Can I ask you to turn to Bates number 15? It should be a copy of his bank records, and I will get you that page number in just a moment as well. It should be page 53.
Page 53, excellent.
Are those the bank records you looked at?
Yes, they are.
Does anything about them look to have been changed or altered?
No, that's the same record.
Your Honor, we offer Lou Donaldson's bank records into evidence as plaintiffs 3.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Okay, they will be so admitted.
So let's take a look at those bank records from Mr. Donaldson. How much money was left in his account after the day of his disappearance?
Approximately $100,000.
Okay, and anywhere on here, do you see any kind of large cash withdrawals in the days leading up to his disappearance?
No, nothing significant.
And following the day that he disappeared, have there been any transactions made on this account since then?
Nope, not in the last 5 years since he disappeared.
Okay. You mentioned you looked into his travels. You mentioned Costa Rica and some planes. Do you know if Mr. Donaldson owned any planes?
Yeah, he was known to be an amateur aviator, and he did own planes from time to time. So I investigated whether he owned any planes at the time of his disappearance. I found that he owned one plane. And then I followed up and located that plane. I photographed that plane.
Okay. Would you recognize that photograph if you saw it again today?
Yeah, I would recognize it.
Okay. I'm going to orient you in that electronic notebook to what's been Bates numbered 1. And that should be on, let's see, page 20. Just let me know when you're there.
Got it.
Is that the picture you took?
That is the one.
Does it look to have been changed, altered, modified at all?
No.
Your Honor, we offer the picture of Lou Donaldson's plane, Bates number 1, into evidence as plaintiff's 4.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Okay, it'll be so admitted.
So, Ms. Pride, I just want to be clear. When you saw this plane, where was it?
It was housed at a hangar. It was being stored.
About how long was that after Mr. Donaldson's disappearance?
About 5 years after his disappearance.
And in your entire investigation, did you find evidence of any other planes that Mr. Donaldson owned at the time of his disappearance?
Just this one.
We've heard some allegations about Costa Rica. Did you look into the theory that Lou Donaldson might have gone to Costa Rica?
Yeah, I did. And I determined that he clearly didn't fly this plane there because it's still at the hangar. But I did send one of my associates that works for me down to Costa Rica, and we searched for him and didn't find any sign that he had been down there.
Ms. Pride, the last thing I'd like to ask you about is the relationship between Lou Donaldson and this defendant.
Mm-hmm.
Did you look into that at all?
I did, yes.
What did you find?
Well, it appeared that their marriage was perhaps coming apart a few months before he disappeared. And I found that Mr. Donaldson had attempted to get a restraining order against Miss Basia a few months before he disappeared.
Were you able to take a look at that restraining order in your investigation?
Yes.
Would you recognize it if you saw it again today?
Yes, I would.
If you could turn in that electronic notebook to Bates number 16, I believe that should be on about page 54. Excuse me, 55.
All right, I'm there.
Is that the temporary restraining order request that you saw?
Yes, it is.
Whose name is at the bottom of that?
That's going to be Lou Donaldson's name and signature.
Does it look to have been changed at all, altered?
Nope.
Your Honor, we offer the request from Lou Donaldson for a temporary restraining order into evidence as plaintiff's 5.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. There's double hearsay here. First, the document itself is an admissible hearsay. Additionally, there are 3 statements contained within the document that are each admissible hearsay as well.
Okay, response?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may offer as to what those statements are.
Sure, outside the presence of the jury. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Your Honor, the statements on this document are from Lou Donaldson, and they say that Lou Donaldson was scared of this defendant, that he was seeking a divorce from this defendant, and that this defendant threatened to kill him. Your Honor, those statements first fall under 8033. There is a statement of Lou Donaldson's mental condition, particularly that he was scared of the defendant. And there also a statement of plan, that he was planning on getting a divorce from this defendant. Additionally, Your Honor, this document is highly relevant to this case. This document is dated for June 12th. The alleged will in this case is dated for June 14th. It calls highly into question the defendant's credibility to assert that Lou Donaldson made these statements and then 2 days later changed his will to give her his entire $5 million estate. So they're very important to the case at hand.
I guess the thing I'm struggling with, counsel, is these are blanket statements that discuss fear or, you know, a want for divorce or these threats that are being made, but it's unclear what that time frame is. If it's multiple instances, you know, we're kind of delving now too into character evidence of Ms. Baja. And so I guess how do we deal with those issues?
Sure. Your Honor, this document is dated for June 12th. That's the date that this document was submitted to the court. And in effect, that would be the date that this document, these statements were officially made. That means that they occurred approximately 2 months prior to Mr. Donaldson's disappearance, excuse me. As to the character evidence issue, Your Honor, we don't plan to use any sort of propensity in this case that because of a past incident that Ms. Bashi did something in this case. We're saying specifically that he wanted a divorce in this case. She threatened to kill him in this case, and that's what she did in this case. So we're not connecting two separate incidences, which is what character evidence prohibits.
And I guess, did your expert rely on this for the purpose of the handwriting analysis or more so the contents of what Mr. Donaldson wrote?
Your Honor, this informed her conclusion that the will in this case was a forgery because of the timing on this document, specifically that these statements were made 2 days before the will was allegedly signed. It seems almost impossible that Lou Donaldson would state to the court that he was scared of the defendant, that she threatened to kill him, and that he wanted a divorce, and then changed his will to give her entire estate to him. So that it does inform her conclusions, and I'll certainly ask her about that once the document comes in.
Your Honor, if I may respond, plaintiff's counsel is arguing the basis of admissibility on relevance grounds. However, plaintiff's counsel has not offered specific hearsay exceptions for the document as a whole, or for specifically the statement that Karen Baja tried to kill me. That's a backwards looking statement. It's not admissible under the exceptions that the plaintiff's counsel has offered so far.
Your Honor, might I clarify?
Sure.
Your Honor, just to be clear, the statement in question is Karen Baja has threatened to kill me. Now that statement is coming from the defendant, which is a party opponent statement. Additionally, as to the document as a whole, we don't plan on using any other portions of the document for the truth of the matter other than the date at the very bottom. And the document as a whole, it's an in-court record because the statements were made in front of a court of law.
Very well argued on both sides. I think maybe the outcome might be different if we were in a criminal case or this was a homicide case. But I don't think we really get over the propensity issues or the hearsay issues necessarily. But what I will do, given that she did rely on this in part for her analysis, I'm going to redact the portions with the statements from Mr. Donaldson. What I will allow, though, is you to refer to it as a court document that was filed by Mr. Donaldson, the date that it was filed, and then if she wants to rely on the signature for any of her comparison, that as well will be permitted. But in terms of the actual statements of the TRO, I'm going to sustain the objection at this time.
Your Honor, may I ask for a clarification?
Sure.
Your Honor, may we refer to the document as it's titled, which is a request for a temporary restraining order?
The thing I'm struggling with is the implications that come with that. So I would prefer you refer to as a court document filed by Lou Donaldson.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead and proceed.
So Ms. Pride, on what day was that court document filed in the court?
Yeah, that was June 12th of 2012.
Okay. And what date did we see on that will you concluded was a forgery?
Well, that will came 2 days after Mr. Donaldson filed something against his wife in court.
Ms. Pride, what did that forged will provide happen to Mr. Donaldson's estate?
Well, it gave the entire estate to Ms. Basia.
And how much was that estate that the forged will gave to this defendant? How much was that estate worth?
$5 million.
Your Honor, we have no further questions of the witness at this time.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Pride, Cam Donaldson hired you?
Yes.
He hired you in July of 2017.
Yeah, it was July.
At that time, Lou Donaldson had been missing since August of 2012.
That's right, almost 5 years.
You have a background as a police officer.
Yeah, I was a police officer for a couple of years, then detective, I guess, for 16 after that.
You were a police officer.
Yes.
Then a detective.
Yes, for 16 years.
Now you own a private investigation firm.
I started it just a couple of years ago.
You own a private investigation firm.
Yes.
Ms. Pride, you investigated this case?
I did.
There's no DNA evidence in this case?
I didn't collect any DNA.
No DNA evidence?
I didn't see any DNA evidence as part of this case, no.
No sign of a physical struggle?
No,
No sign of a dead body?
no,
Ms. Pride, you knew Mr. Donaldson flew planes
yes.
and that his van was found in an airstrip after his disappearance.
Yeah, his glasses were left on the seat of his van, which was pretty strange.
His van was found in an airstrip.
Yeah,
Ms. Pride, I'm directing your attention to the will. The will contains the phrase, "should I die or disappear." Is that right?
yes, it does.
You're aware that the police investigation is still active and open.
That's correct.
And you analyzed the will in this case.
I did.
You analyzed the signatures.
Yes, that's my job.
Ms. Pride, in your report, you referred to something called graphology. I'm going to ask you a few questions about that.
Sure.
Ms. Pride, graphology is a study of handwriting.
It is.
And you're a private investigator and forensic document examiner.
Yeah, forensic document examiners examine handwriting on documents.
You're a forensic document examiner.
Correct. I'm a board certified forensic document examiner.
You would agree that not all documents have handwriting on them.
Sure, some documents are just typed. If they don't have a signature, they don't have a signature.
Not all documents have handwriting or signature.
Sure, not all documents have handwriting or a signature.
And you're able to do a forensic examination on a document that doesn't have handwriting on it.
Yeah, that's a different kind of evaluation. Graphology is sort of a subset of my broader field of expertise, which is forensic document examination.
You're able to determine, do a forensic document examination analysis on a report that doesn't have handwriting on it.
Yes.
And forensic document examination, like you just said, can include handwriting analysis.
That's correct.
But it's not the same thing as handwriting analysis.
Well, it can be. Handwriting analysis is a part of forensic document examination, but it can be part of that process.
They're two different fields.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think graphology is a subset of forensic document examination.
They require two different areas of expertise.
I mean, yeah, like I attended trainings from the American Association of Handwriting experts, or AAHA, and then I'm board certified also as a forensic document examiner. So yeah, there are different governing bodies, but there's overlap in the fields, yes.
So they're different areas of expertise.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
You're asking for clarification for purposes of the jury.
I'm going to overrule. Go ahead.
Ms. Pride, they're two different areas of expertise.
I think that they're very closely related, but sure.
And Ms. Pride, you testified earlier that you have formal training in handwriting analysis.
Yes, I do.
That took place in 2002.
That was the first time I had formal handwriting training, yes.
It was in 2002?
Yeah, about 17, 18 years ago, something like that.
So it's, 18 years ago.
Yeah, something like that.
And that seminar lasted 2 weeks?
Yeah, it was like an intensive 2-week training, yeah.
And Ms. Pride, you don't teach any courses in handwriting analysis?
I'm not a professor, no.
And you're not published in the field of handwriting analysis?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Redirect.
Just briefly, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Pride, have you received continued training throughout your career?
Yes, I have. I attend regular trainings. Every year I do continuing education. And then I get recertified. I was first certified by the board, I think it was like 16 years or so ago, and I've been recertified every 4 years since.
Your Honor, we have no more questions.
All right, Ms. Pride, you may be excused. Does the plaintiff have any further witnesses or anything they would like to enter into the record?
Yes, Your Honor. As Ms. Harmon alerted you to in pretrial matters, we do have testimony by way of video from an individual whose legal name is Exotic Bob. We'd like to play that in front of the jury at this time so that they can see the testimony on this matter.
All right, and is there any objection to that being played?
There is, though, I do think we are objecting in a way that will hurt everyone else by not being able to see that video. We do object on the grounds of its relevance and that it be inadmissible hearsay and contain several statements that are hearsay.
I guess outside the presence of the jury, then, are there any specific statements that you are concerned about in terms of relevance or hearsay, or are you finding, or the objection to be that the entire video is hearsay?
We would argue that the entire video is irrelevant, but specifically there's a statement in it, I believe, that's something along the lines of, Karen told me she'd feed me to her cats like she did her husband. And that would be the specific statement that we would have an issue with, but the whole video we would argue is irrelevant.
Okay, in response to that, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. As to the relevance, I believe opposing counsel just referenced the statement where Ms. Baja actually admitted to committing the act she's alleged to do here. She said, I'll feed you to my cats just like I did him. She said, I'll do to you exactly as I did to my husband. Those statements in a case in which she's accused of killing her husband have a very, very high relevance value and certainly far exceed the requirement of Rule 401. As to the hearsay, Ms. Baja's statements, those are party opponent statements. Any statements by Exotic Bob, his independent statements, frankly, Your Honor, we don't care about those statements. We're not going to use them for the truth. And we have actually redacted the video to limit those as much as possible. Any statements in which he's relaying the statements of Ms. Baja, Your Honor, we alerted you to the fact that he's an unavailable witness today. As an unavailable witness, there's an additional hearsay exception that applies to his statements. That's the statement against interest. And in the broader context of this video, he's discussing an illegal transaction that he entered into with the defendant, specifically the importation of endangered animals, which is illegal. And so because he's discussing a crime that he was committing with the defendant, Your Honor, that's a statement against his interest and would be accepted from the rule against hearsay.
All right, and Ms. Kaplan, I'll give you the final word.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I may, the statements, when I mentioned relevance, I really mean to the nature of the relationship between Exotic Bob and Karen Baja. The defense, or the plaintiff, excuse me, has failed to lay a foundation of how these two individuals are actually related. Though the statement from Mr. Exotic Bob alleges to have been a business partnership with Karen Baja, there's absolutely no evidence indicating as such. And again, that specific statement is hearsay and not relevant to the case. And like I said, no foundation's been laid for it. Moreover, if it were to be admitted, it could run the risk of the probative value being outweighed by the risk of prejudice to the defendant.
Well, very well argued on both sides. I do believe, based on the exceptions that have been put forth by plaintiff's counsel, we are good to play this video as it's redacted. Plus, we can't deprive the world of Exotic Bob, I don't think. So, counsel, you're free to publish whenever you're ready.
Certainly, Your Honor. He's got a lot to say.
And at the end of that meeting, Karen Baja walked out of my office. She stopped, suddenly turned around, and she came marching back to my desk, and she leaned over and she looked me right in the eye and she said, Exotic Bob? That's me, Exotic Bob. She said, Exotic Bob, I swear if you double cross me on this deal, I will do to you exactly as I did to my husband. She said, there won't be no disappearance, no mythical flight to Costa Rica. She goes, your last supper will be you. I'll feed you to my kiddies just like I did him. And then she turned around and she walked out of my office. That's all I've got to say about that.
Your Honor, with that, the plaintiff rests its case in chief.
All right, thank you, counsel. What we're going to do at this point is give the scoring jurors a moment to score, do whatever they need to do, the timekeepers a chance to calculate everything. Let's take about a 2-minute break, and then we will reconvene and then start with any halftime motions and the defense case in chief.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And everybody, we're going to take actually 5 minutes. So if you need to run to the restroom or get water or anything like that, take your time.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Do we have everybody back?
Your Honor, it appears everyone from the plaintiff is here.
Okay. And then we're like, I think.
I'm not seeing my co-counsel, but I think she is here.
Oh,
I was like, I'm sure.
waiting for the Brady Bunch. That's okay. No problem at all. I just want to make sure we have everybody. And do I have all of my scoring jurors back and ready to go? If you could just say yes.
I'm back.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here.
Wonderful. And then would the teams like a time check?
Yes, Your Honor.
Sure, thank you, Your Honor.
For the plaintiff side?
Sorry, go ahead, Kylie.
So Austin and I find that the plaintiff side has 38 minutes left and defense has 52.
Okay, wonderful. And then what we will go ahead and do is the witnesses have been instructed that if you have 1 minute left, they can give you a 1 minute warning, and then they will tell you to stop if you've gone over your time. But I think hopefully we'll be in good shape. All right, thank you. And we are going to go ahead and dive back in since it looks like we have everybody. Are there any motions before we begin the defense case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense moves for a directed verdict. the plaintiff failed to identify the defendant in the Zoom courtroom during its case in chief. As a result, a reasonable jury would not have a legally sufficient evidentiary basis to find for the plaintiff. If that were to be set aside, even looking at the evidence in the light most favorable to the non-moving party, no reasonable juror could render judgment for the plaintiff. They have failed to meet their burden of proving by a preponderance of the evidence that the elements of a wrongful death cause of action have been met. Specifically, the plaintiff has failed to establish that Lou Donaldson is actually dead. All the plaintiff can point to in this case is a legal declaration of death. This is not the equivalent of actually dead, which is what the cause of action calls for. In addition, the plaintiff has failed to prove that the death of Lou Donaldson was caused by Ms. Baja, and they've also failed to prove that any conduct of Ms. Baja's caused harm to the plaintiff.
In response.
Yes, Your Honor. This is a civil case, and it's our understanding that pursuant to the local rules, given the format the trial is taking place in this year, that the requirement of identification of the defendant has been waived. Additionally, Your Honor, as to the elements of this case, taking the evidence in the light most favorable to the plaintiff, the non-moving party, a reasonable juror can absolutely find that Ms. Baja killed Lou Donaldson. Specifically, Your Honor, we've offered evidence that she has a motive to commit this act because she was threatened with divorce, and she was threatened with having her $1 million lifestyle taken away. Additionally, Your Honor, we offered evidence of incriminating behavior after the fact. Specifically, that only 36 hours after her husband went missing, she went to go get his will. Your Honor, we also heard that she came up with a forged will after she retrieved whatever was in that lockbox. That itself is highly suspicious and suggests that she's responsible for the death of Mr. Donaldson. And most importantly, Your Honor, we've offered testimony onto the record where this defendant has actually admitted to doing what she's accused of. She said, "I will do to you exactly as I did to my husband. I'll feed you to the cats." And Your Honor, as to damages, if this defendant robbed Cam Donaldson of his father, certainly there are emotional damages in this case, and any jury could find that.
And to nobody's surprise, I will be denying this motion. We're going to go ahead and dive into the defense case in chief if you would like to call your first witness.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Excuse me. We call Ms. Karen Baja.
All right, Ms. Baja, you've been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Baja, please introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Karen Baja
And where do you currently live?
in Pioneer, Statesville.
I'm going to ask you about an individual named Lou Donaldson. Are you familiar with that person?
Of course, he's my husband.
And how long were you married?
Well, if he was still here today, we would be married for about 20 years.
And now I'm going to direct your attention to the summer of 2012. Do you recall that summer?
Yes, unfortunately, that was the summer that my husband left me.
And around that time, did Mr. Donaldson mention any plan to leave you?
Well, he didn't mention a plan to leave me. He did mention that he wanted a divorce.
And what did that mean to you?
Well, to be honest, it caught me by surprise. My husband and I, at the time, we were struggling with certain aspects of our relationship, just like any other couple. But it was my understanding that we had agreed to work through them. And I thought that we were going to continue to work together with them. So it was a surprise that he did indeed share that he wanted a divorce.
And when you mentioned that you were working through it, what did that mean?
Well, we were still living together. We were not separated at any time, and we worked together as well. Every day, we worked side by side doing what we loved, which was taking care of our big cats.
Now, you mentioned that he left. When did that occur?
It was around August 17th, 2012.
Do you know where Mr. Donaldson went?
No.
Did your husband have a means of travel, of going somewhere?
Yes, he had a hobby for purchasing and selling private planes, small planes. So he had a small fleet of them and would take them at on a whim at any time to fly wherever he would like.
How many planes would you say your husband owned?
Oh, no one really knew how many he had because he kind of kept to himself. He wouldn't really properly register them or properly log flight plans. So no one really knew the actual number.
And did you know where he kept his planes?
He would keep them at several different private airstrips throughout the state.
What about how often did he fly?
It was really regular. It was a hobby. I believe he transferred his hobby of buying and selling cars to planes. So he would fly regularly, several times a month sometimes, and for several days at a time.
And would he always tell you and others if he was planning a trip?
No, he took them as he wanted to and came back as he wanted to. He would always come back though, and he would always come back to his work at Wildlife.
Do you know if he regularly filed flight plans when he was taking a trip?
No, he did not.
Now, did you ever find out if he had used a plane the weekend that he went missing?
Well, I never found out myself, but I do know that the police in their investigation found his car at a private airstrip.
And was his car returned to you?
Yes.
What else, if anything, was returned to you?
Well, in his car were his glasses and his keys.
Do you know if he owned other pairs of glasses?
I don't know if he owned several or just an extra one, but given the nature of our work, just like me, I own several pairs of glasses because, you know, our coworkers, the cats, can be pretty unpredictable. So we always made sure we had extra pairs around.
I'm glad you mentioned the cats. I'm going to come back to that. But I wanted to ask you, have you seen Mr. Donaldson since he disappeared?
No.
And during the time that he was gone, what did you do?
Well, at first, I tried not to let any negative possibilities come into my mind. Like I said, he would leave and go for a few days at a time. So I just tried to keep up the work at at Wildlife, and unfortunately, as time passed and he never returned and no one heard anything from him, it became evident that he wasn't coming back.
And drawing your attention to August 2017, what did you do then?
Well, by then it had been 5 years since anyone had ever heard of him or heard from him or seen him. And I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a form of closure. I needed to be able to focus on wildlife entirely so that I could make his legacy live on. So I had him declared legally dead.
And why did you do that?
Well, in order, I needed to have him declared legally dead so that I could receive his life insurance policy, which I then took and put right back into wildlife.
Now, rewinding a bit back to August 18, 2012, do you remember that night?
Yes, I do. A big cat had just given birth and she unfortunately rejected the cubs. So it fell onto me to make sure that they were being taken care of. They were newborn cubs. They relied on me entirely. And unfortunately, because I was not expecting that, I also did not have enough milk for them. So in a rush, I left my home around 3 a.m. and I drove to the nearest grocery store that was open. And in my haste, I left my phone. And of course, just my luck, my car broke down on the way back home. So I called my brother, who's a sheriff, to come and pick me up.
And why didn't you call your husband?
Well, to be honest, I didn't really feel safe out there in the dark by myself. So I decided that it would be best to have a sheriff in uniform in a police car coming to pick me up and take me home, just as matters of, someone around or what have you.
Now, directing your attention to the next day, early morning hours of August 19, did you hear Cam Donaldson testify earlier today?
Yes.
And can you tell us what happened that morning around 6 a.m., August 19th?
Yes. That morning I went to the office to check on the office like I did regularly.
And what was happening at the office when you arrived?
Nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't hear any sound of an alarm, and there's nothing on record that shows that there was an actual alarm that went off.
And you've mentioned, and others have indicated as much, that you owned Wild Wildlife with your husband.
Yes.
How often would you say you went to the office during that time?
Oh, every day. I go to Wild Wildlife every day.
And what did you have access to inside the office?
Everything. It still is my company, my business. So I had keys to everything.
Is there anything that you can think of that you did not have access to?
No.
That morning around 6 a.m., did you cut a lock at the front gate of Wild Wildlife?
No.
And did you see any damage to the office when you were there that morning?
No, I did not.
Did you steal Mr. Donaldson's will from the office that day?
No, I did not.
Now that we're talking about your office, and I'd like to talk again about the big cats. You mentioned that you had to run out to get milk for newborn cubs. Could you tell us a bit more about what work is like at Wild Wildlife?
Of course. Wild Wildlife is a big cat sanctuary. We rescue big cats and we give them a home. We feed them, we take care of them, we cherish them and love them. And so that's primarily the work that I did and continue to do at Wild Wildlife. And, taking care of big cats is a 24/7 responsibility. It can be very unpredictable at times and require full attention and energy.
Drawing the court and opposing counsel's attention to what has been constructively marked as Defense Exhibit A. Now, Ms. Baja, drawing your attention to Defense Exhibit A as well. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes, it's a photo of our favorite cat, Tara.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of that cat?
Yes.
Moving Defense Exhibit A into evidence and permission to publish, Your Honor.
Any objection from defense or from plaintiff? My apologies.
No, Your Honor, we agreed to this in pretrial.
Okay, you have permission to publish and it is entered into the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Baja, was Tara the only big cat at Wild Wildlife?
No, we have several.
And could you tell us a little bit more? You started, but can you tell us more about what it takes to care for cats like Tara?
Well, it takes a special skill and comfort with these large creatures. And it also takes time and getting to know them and making sure you know each unique aspect of an animal's personality. I work 24/7 around the clock. I do things such as clean up their habitats. I also work on making sure that all the supplies are stocked and making sure the financials are straight because of that. And as I said earlier, I also take care of any newcomers to the sanctuary as well.
And was Lou Donaldson aware of everything that you did for the cats?
Absolutely. We worked side by side with each other, and he knew that I was the only other person who the big cats trusted, and to get everything done and to do it in a safe and comfortable manner for them.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response.
Your Honor, as the witness testified, Lou Donaldson and Karen Baja worked very closely together, so she would be able to speak from her personal knowledge of whether or not he knew what she was doing there as they worked together.
I'm going to overrule.
Ms. Baja, did anyone else in the business work with the cats like you and Lou did?
No.
And what about Cam Donaldson? What kind of work did he do at Wild Wildlife?
He worked as Lou's assistant in the office. He did mostly business administration.
And why did you fire Cam Donaldson?
I never trusted Cam. We don't have a good relationship together.
Now, Ms. Baja, do you recognize this exhibit, plaintiff's exhibit, that hopefully is appearing on your screen?
Yes.
Could you tell us what this is?
This is my husband's will.
And have you seen this exhibit before?
Of course, I was there when it was signed. I signed it as well.
And what role were you in when you signed it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry, what role were you in when you signed it?
Oh, I served as a witness.
And Samantha Lane, do you know this person?
Yes, she was the other witness present.
Now, Ms. Baja, did you write this will?
No.
Did you write or sign Mr. Donaldson's signature on it?
No, I did not.
Directing your attention to the language of the will, specifically the second paragraph that begins with I appoint. Could you please read that out loud?
I appoint Karen Baja to be the sole executor of this will, and if I should die or disappear, I give to Karen Baja absolutely all my real and personal property whatsoever.
Do you think that language, or what do you think about that language? If I should die or disappear, what are your thoughts?
Objection, Your Honor.
Your Honor, we're asking just for a lay opinion.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, counsel. What's the objection to?
I'm sorry.
That's
A
okay.
proper opinion.
Okay, response?
We are just asking as a lay opinion what she thinks about the language. I think that she could weigh in what she thought, not based on any type of expertise.
I guess what would the relevance be of her opinion about that language?
As there's a suggestion in the trial that she actually wrote it, this would give her the opportunity to explain why that's not the case from her perspective.
Okay, I'll give a little latitude as to her personal opinion about that language. Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Baja, what was your personal opinion of that sentence about dying or disappearing?
I mean, I didn't think much of it when I signed. It's whatever Lou wanted at the time. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know what's typically in a will or not in a will.
Now, Ms. Baja, what did your husband leave you?
He left me a wild life and all of our cats. And I'll tell you, you know, I'm happy that that was what he decided for us, because if it weren't for me having access to them, I don't know what would have happened.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Baja, I just want to make something clear. You petitioned the court for your husband to be legally dead, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you did that because, in your words, he was never coming home.
At that point, it had been 5 years, and I hoped and prayed that he would come home every day. But after 5 years of nothing, I needed closure.
And you asked the court to do that because you were sure of it.
At that point, it was the only option that I felt I had.
Ms. Baja, I want to move on and talk about your relationship with Lou Donaldson. You were married to him, correct?
Correct.
When you met him, you were pretty young, weren't you?
Yeah, yes.
And you didn't have a whole lot when you met him, did you?
No.
In fact, you were desperate for a ride and hitchhiking on the side of the road.
At that time, I was hitchhiking, yes.
But Lou was kind enough to pick you up.
Yes, that's the kind of man he was.
And for you, well, it was love at first sight.
Yeah, we connected immediately.
Now, Lou was a little bit older than you, wasn't he?
Yes.
By about 20 years?
Correct.
And because he was older, well, he had his life together.
Yeah.
And the security and the stability that Lou provided, well, you liked that.
I'd say it was definitely a plus to all the other great things about him.
And Lou provided a great life for you.
Yeah.
He even gave you an animal sanctuary.
Well, it was something that we both had a passion for and worked on together.
And that life, and the animal sanctuary, well, they were important to you, weren't they?
Of course.
Now, Miss Baja, you and Lou had a great marriage, didn't you?
For the most part, yes.
But by 2012, you guys had hit a rough patch.
Yes, we were struggling just like any other couple, but we were working through it.
It had gotten so bad that Lou asked you for a divorce.
Yes.
Now, Miss Baja, you believe he wanted a divorce because you think he had a mistress.
I had thoughts that he might, and that might have been why he left so often, but it was something that we were discussing and working through, but I didn't really have any certain information as to whether he had one.
Miss Baja, to be clear, when you met Lou, well, he was married, wasn't he?
Yes,
He actually left his first wife to be with you.
correct.
And so you were afraid he was going to leave you to be with this new mistress.
Well, it was something that we had to work through. Again, I was surprised that he wanted a divorce to begin with because we'd had discussed working through the issues and the things that I had heard.
Miss Baja, I want to move on and talk about August 18th. It's your testimony that you were down at the sanctuary nursing some tiger cubs, correct?
Correct.
And they had run out of formula, and so you needed to get some more supplies.
Correct.
And so you went down to the store.
Yes.
And that was at about 3 in the morning on August 18th.
Yes.
But on your way back from the store, well, your car broke down, didn't it?
Correct.
You left your phone at home.
Yes.
So you had to ask someone on the side, didn't you?
Sorry, you broke up. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, can we just pause just for 1 second? We're having a little pausing action. Okay, let me see. Okay, go ahead and proceed. I think it's fine now.
Yes, Ms. Baja, I'll repeat that question. You had to flag someone down on the side of the road to help you, didn't you?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Baja, you can't tell us the name of that person, can you?
I didn't ask it.
You can't tell us what they looked like.
No, it was 8 years ago.
You can't even tell us what color car they were driving.
It wasn't something I was paying attention to.
Ms. Baja, all you can tell us is that they stopped to help you on the side of the road.
Yes.
And you used their phone to call for help, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
But you didn't call your husband.
No, I didn't. Like I said, I would feel safer to have someone in uniform with a cop car, given that I was there with a stranger and there could have been other strangers around.
Ms. Baja, you didn't call your husband because you didn't know if he was at home.
Well, I didn't know if he was at home or at the sanctuary, but for the most part, I didn't call him because I was in such a rush to get back to the cats. I just wanted to make the one phone call to my brother and go home.
And so you called your brother and he took you back to the sanctuary that morning.
Yes.
And it was later that day on the 18th that you discovered Lou was missing.
Well, I didn't realize whether he was missing. Like I said, he would leave for days at a time without notice. But as I said before, it was after, quite an extended amount of time later that week that I really realized that he wasn't coming.
Ms. Baja, after you thought Lou was missing, well, you went down to the sanctuary that night, correct?
Which night?
On the 18th, after you thought Lou was missing, you went down to the sanctuary.
I go to the sanctuary every day, so I probably did.
But you said you went to the sanctuary because you didn't trust Cam.
I've never trusted Cam.
Now, Ms. Baja, after you realized your husband was missing, you didn't try to call him.
I waited to hear back from him for him to come back. That's usually how it worked when he would leave for a few days at a time.
You didn't call him to see if he knew where he was.
Sorry, you broke up again.
Yes, Ms. Baja, I'll repeat that question. You didn't call Cam to see if he knew where Lou was.
No, like I said, we don't really have any form of talking relationship, never have.
And once you decided your husband was missing, well, you didn't call the police.
I did have the police come and look at him after, or look for him after some time, because no one had heard of him from him.
And when you called the police and talked to them, you mentioned Costa Rica.
Well, I knew that was one of the locations he liked to frequent.
And you did that because you just thought Lou got on a plane and flown to Costa Rica.
It was possible, yes.
Now, Ms. Baja, you said previously that Lou would just take off on his plane on a whim.
Yes.
You even said he'd be gone for days and you wouldn't know where he was.
Yes.
Now, throughout all of your marriage, this was common for Lou, correct?
Yes.
Any of those times Lou had taken off on an airplane, you didn't think he was missing.
Correct.
You didn't try to call the police then.
Correct. Because he would always come back after a few days.
But this time, Lou had only been missing a few days, and that's when you reported him missing.
Well, I had not heard anything from him after a while. And like I said, it was only a few days that he would actually be gone.
Now, Ms. Baja, I want to move on from this. Only a few days after Lou was missing, you fired his son, Cam, correct?
Yes.
And at that point, you took over the sanctuary.
Yes.
Because you loved it.
Of course.
So you had to keep it up and running.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Baja, I want to talk about this will that you've spoken about. That's Lou's will, correct?
Yes, it is.
And it leaves everything to you.
Yes.
That means you got all of his money.
Yes.
All of his property.
Correct.
And even his sanctuary.
Yes, we co-owned it.
Now, Ms. Baja, just to clarify one more time, you're the one who had Lou declared legally dead, correct?
After 5 years, yes.
You got the sanctuary.
Yes.
And the first thing you did after you had Lou declared legally dead was cash in his $5 million life insurance policy.
Yes, as I said earlier, I used that money to put towards the sanctuary to make sure that his legacy could live on.
Ms. Baja, that's a yes to my question.
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Ms. Baja, can you remind us what kind of work did Cam Donaldson do at Wild Wildlife?
Cam worked as Lou's assistant and did mostly business administration.
And what kind of work did you do at Wild Wildlife while Lou was still with you in Pioneer?
I pretty much spent most of my time with the cats and taking care of them, but as co-owner, I always kind of had my hand in all aspects of the business.
And why did you fire Cam Donaldson?
Well, like I said, I never trusted him. And, I knew that I was going to eventually have to explain it to Lou when he came back, but unfortunately, I never had the chance.
Now, when you met Lou Donaldson that day on the road, did you know anything about him?
No.
Did you know that he was a self-made man?
No.
Did you know that he maybe had $1 million?
No, he even drove a beat-up van.
So, Ms. Baja, did you marry Lou Donaldson for his money?
Absolutely not.
What did you and Lou have in common?
Well, aside from a huge passion and interest in big cats and creating a safe haven for them, we always kind of had a relationship where our personalities clicked from the beginning. And he was a hardworking, loving, caring man, and I admired him for everything he did for the big cats and for the community and how hard he always worked.
And you and Lou Donaldson, you ran the business together, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you received his will, what were your thoughts about what you were left?
Well, it made sense to me, at least, that he would give me the control and trust of Wild Wildlife. We were co-owners, so it was already something that I was used to doing. And because it was such a niche responsibility of taking care of cats and the big cats, and that was really my sole job at Wild Wildlife, it made sense to me.
Thank you, Ms. Baja. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Baja. You are excused and can go sit at your virtual defense table. Do we have any further defense witnesses at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Chris Renner to the stand.
All right. Mr. Renner, you've been previously sworn, and counsel, you may proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Renner. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Chris Rennan.
Mr. Renner, are you employed?
I am.
What do you do for work?
I'm an investigator and document examiner for Summit Life Insurance Company.
Can you give a brief overview to the jury of what that entails?
Sure. So to put it bluntly, I investigate fraud. Sometimes people will purchase insurance policies and try to cash them in illegally. So it's my job to make sure that that happens as little as possible.
Mr. Renner, how long have you been in that role for Summit Life?
Well, this might out me a little bit, but I guess I've been there about 20 years now.
It's okay. Mr. Renner, does your job require any specialized education, training, or experience?
It does.
Can you please give the jury an overview of your educational background?
Sure. I got my bachelor's in criminology from Summit College.
Do you receive any continuing training in your field?
I do. So after I got my degree, I completed police academy training, and that's primarily what I relied on at that point.
Do you have any relevant professional experience prior to your time at Summit Life?
Yes. So before I got to Summit Life, I spent 3 years as a forensic document examiner for the Statesville Bureau of Investigation, right there in their crime lab.
Mr. Renner, do you hold any certifications?
I do. I hold 2. The first is from the Board of Forensic Document Examiners, which I renew every 4 years. And the second is from the Association of Certified Fraud Specialists.
Mr. Renner, have you testified as an expert witness before?
I have. So I've been qualified to testify 25 times, specifically in the field of document examination. And over the course of that 25 times, I've testified for both prosecutions and mostly on behalf of Summit Life.
Mr. Renner, how did you get involved in this case?
Well, like any other claim, Summit is really the one who puts me into action. So given that Lou Donaldson had disappeared without a trace for a long time, before we paid Ms. Baja the insurance money, they asked me to investigate to see if there would be any reason we wouldn't want to.
Did you in fact conduct that investigation?
I did.
Are the methods that you used reasonably relied upon by other experts in your field?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we move to have Chris Renner admitted as an expert in handwriting analysis and forensic document examination.
Any voir dire or objection to that tender?
No, Your Honor, we have no objection.
Okay, so you'll be so tendered and you may proceed.
Mr. Renner, I'd like to go back to how you became involved in this case. Was there a time when you were asked to investigate a document for this case?
Yes, there was. I was asked to investigate Mr. Donaldson's last will and testament.
What aspects of the will were you asked to investigate?
So I primarily looked at 3 things, as I would with any will and testament: really the signature, the language of the will itself, and the witnesses that signed it.
Mr. Renner, can you explain to the jury how you would have gone about your process of analyzing the signature on Mr. Donaldson's will?
Sure. So as is the preferred method in my field, the first thing that you'll want to do is collect samples of the signature that you're seeking to test. These have to be known samples, obviously. So in this case, I collected a few examples of Mr. Donaldson's signatures. Then you want to look at those much more closely to see any features that come into the handwriting. How quickly do they tend to sign it? Is it more of a scribble, or is it definitively where somebody might write out every letter? And you want to make sure that those features are consistent in every known sample that you evaluate. Finally, once you have those features, you will compare them to the signature in question to make sure that they are present.
And Mr. Renard, after going about that process that you just described, did you reach a conclusion regarding the authenticity of the signature on the will?
I did.
What was that conclusion?
Well, while there were some differences between the signature on Lou Donaldson's last will and testament, I found these differences from previous samples to be inconclusive.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by inconclusive?
Yeah, simply that somebody can't say that based on that signature, those differences, that was forged.
Mr. Renner, does a person's signature always look the same?
No.
What would be some factors that would affect the way that someone's signature appears?
Oh, much like you would sign your own name. You know, sometimes you're in a hurry and you have to scribble it down really quickly. Obviously, that's going to lead to some differences. But, you know, it can also differ based on what sort of pen you're signing with, or what sort of utensil you have. And then some other factors that I've found that can influence somebody's signature are the age and their health at the time they sign something.
Mr. Renner, did you reach a conclusion regarding the authenticity of the document as a whole?
Yes, I found the document to be authentic because the signature contains sufficient similarities such that it was likely that the signature was written by Lou Donaldson himself.
You mentioned earlier that you looked at other factors of the will inclusive of the signature. Did you reach a conclusion regarding whether or not the document itself was authentic?
I did.
What was that conclusion?
Simply that I did find the document to be authentic. Again, there was some interesting language that I found in it, but all indications were that Lou Donaldson had written it and that there was no reason to doubt that.
Mr. Renner, did you reach a conclusion regarding whether or not Summit Life Insurance should pay out the life insurance policy to Karen Baja?
I did.
What was that conclusion?
I recommended that we had no reason not to pay out the insurance policy. Again, given all the circumstances surrounding this case and the materials I reviewed, there was no legitimate concern that any fraud was at play.
Mr. Renner, let me ask you a hypothetical. If you had any hesitation as to the authenticity of the signature itself or of the document as a whole, would you have still made that conclusion and recommendation to Summit Life?
Of course not.
Was that an objection?
No, Your Honor.
I apologize. I heard something. Okay, keep going.
Of course not. Again, my client is Summit Life Insurance, and if there was any foul play, that my job is on the line. I wouldn't recommend they pay out any insurance policy unless there was no indication of fraud.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Renner, you work for Summit Life Insurance Company, isn't that right?
Yes.
And you actually got involved in this case by the special request of the CEO of your company. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Specifically, he asked you to look into whether or not this defendant forged Lou Donaldson's will or was responsible for Lou Donaldson's disappearance, didn't he?
That's correct.
Now, in the end, you were the person who recommended that Summit Life pay out this claim.
Yes, I was.
It's a $5 million claim.
Yep, that's what the insurance policy was worth.
So, Mr. Donaldson, you'd certainly hate to be wrong about a $5 million claim, wouldn't you?
Yeah, again, in my 20 years of experience, I don't have a tendency to do that, but sure, nobody wants to, you know, make a wrong call at work.
Right, because if you made the wrong call, your company would be at a $5 million loss.
Well, again, we get money for the insurance policies. You'd have to talk to our accounting department about what would have been lost if we would have paid out versus what was paid in. But yeah, based on my call, Summit Life Insurance paid out $5 million.
Well, we know one thing that would have been lost. You just told Ms. Drennan if you got it wrong, that was your job on the line, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I certainly don't think I would have been fired, but it certainly might impact the company's reputation of me and my history.
Let's talk about your investigation into this claim. Now, you know that on August 18th of 2017, the defendant had her husband declared legally dead.
That's right.
And that was 5 years to the day that she had him declared missing.
Yes.
You know that only minutes or perhaps hours later, that was when she submitted her claim for $5 million to your company.
Yeah, at the point that we make a finding that somebody is dead, that's our call as the company to decide whether or not to pay out the life insurance policy and to check if any foul play is involved.
So that's right that it was only minutes or hours after declaring him dead that she filed the claim with your company?
I don't recall the exact time. I just remember that it was on the same day.
Okay. Now, when you actually looked into that claim, you talked to Mr. Donaldson's friends, his family members, some of his business associates, right?
Yes.
And when you did that, you discovered that not a single person has seen or heard from Mr. Donaldson since August 17th of 2012. Is that correct?
Yes.
You also looked at Mr. Donaldson's bank statements in this case, didn't you?
I did.
You saw that he had almost $100,000 left in his bank account, right?
You said the account. Again, I'm not sure how many accounts Mr. Donaldson may have had, but in the bank records that were made available to me, there was $100,000 in that one account.
Well, you investigated his disappearance, didn't you?
I did.
And in your entire investigation, you only found that one bank account.
That's the only bank record I come across. Again, I primarily relied on the records from the Pioneer Sheriff County's office.
And when you saw those bank records, you saw there was almost $100,000 left in the account, wasn't there?
In that account, yeah.
You saw there hasn't been a single transaction on that account since the day he disappeared.
That's true.
You'd agree with me. It just doesn't make sense that someone would leave $100,000 in the bank and then fly off and live the life of luxury somewhere. Wouldn't you agree with that?
That's speculative.
I'm going to overrule its cross-exam. He can say whether he knows or not. Thank you.
So, Mr. Renner, I'll ask you again. You'd agree that it just doesn't make sense. Nobody would leave $100,000 in a bank account and then fly off to live somewhere else.
I don't know. If that's the only account they have, maybe if they have additional ones, maybe that money's coming from somewhere else. I just don't know.
Well, Mr. Renner, let's talk about what else you don't know. The police in this case, they didn't provide you with a single piece of evidence, did they?
Not that I remember looking at. Again, I looked at some of the records from the investigation, if I recall correctly, but nothing specifically.
You don't have any of those records here today, do you?
No.
In fact, Mr. Renner, you weren't with this defendant on the night her husband went missing.
No.
You don't know where she was.
I don't.
You don't know who she was with.
Again, all of that information, I know what I was able to gather by talking to the people I interviewed in this case. So what she had said was that she went to go give food for some of her cats on that evening. But again, I wasn't there with her, and I certainly wouldn't have been at whatever pet store she was at.
Right. You learned that she claimed she went to a pet store at 3 o'clock in the morning for tiger formula. That's what they told you?
Yes.
You weren't actually with her, so you don't know who she was with that night.
No.
And you certainly can't tell us what it was she was doing on the night Lou disappeared?
Again, I have a general idea based off of the interviews I conducted for this case, but if you're asking me again if I was there and with her on that night, I wasn't.
You looked at that will just a minute ago on direct examination, didn't you?
Yes,
You talked about that phrase where it said, if I should die or disappear. Do you remember that?
I do.
Mr. Renner, you have looked at a lot of wills in your career as an investigator for the insurance company, right?
I have.
You've never seen that phrase before, have you?
No.
And I want to make sure I've got you right. You yourself would call that suspicious.
Yeah, the language stuck out to me a little. Yes.
You also discussed how you did a handwriting analysis in this case. Do you remember discussing that?
I do.
Okay. I want to take a look at those signatures that you actually used and show them to the jury.
Sure.
The 3 signatures you used, right?
Yeah, these were 3 that I compared.
The top 2, those are verified signatures. We know those were written by Lou, don't we?
Yes.
And that bottom one, that's the one in question. That's the one that appears on the will that the defendant produced after Lou disappeared.
Correct.
So I want to make sure we understand your testimony clearly. You're telling the jury today that those L's were all potentially written by the same person.
They were.
That those D's were all potentially written by the same person.
Yes.
Mr. Renner, your testimony today is that the O's at the end of the beginning and end of Donaldson, that those O's were really written by the same person.
Well, you can't be 100% certain. In all likelihood, based off of my training, they were.
Your Honor, we have no further questions of this witness.
Okay, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, proceed.
Mr. Renner, have you seen claimants file for their life insurance payout on the first available day before?
Yes, and that didn't stick out to me in this case simply because Mr. Donaldson had been already disappeared by 5 years at that point.
And you took the day of the claim being filed into consideration in your overall analysis of the will.
Of course.
You took the language of the will, including the statement, should I die or disappear, into account in the analysis.
Leading.
What was the objection?
Leading, Your Honor. The question suggests the answer.
I'll rephrase, Your Honor.
Okay, sustained.
Did you take the language of the will into account during your analysis?
I did.
Mr. Renner, if you had any hesitation as to the authenticity of either the signature on the will or the document as a whole, would you have made the recommendation to Summit Life Insurance that the company should pay out the life insurance policy to Karen Baja?
Absolutely not. Again, it's a lot more risky in my profession to pay out a claim as opposed to wait until all criminal proceedings or investigations had been concluded. There just simply wasn't any indication that any of that was at risk in this case.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may be excused. Are there any further witnesses for the defense or any additional evidence you'd like to put on the record?
No additional witnesses, Your Honor. The defense rests its case. However, the defense would like to renew its motion for direct verdict.
Okay. And I'm going to deny it, but duly noted. What we're going to do then at this point, I want to give timekeepers a moment and our scoring jurors a moment if they want to run to the restroom or anything like that before closings. So let's take about 5 and then we will join back here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Gotta remember to unmute. So close on the technology, you guys. We've made it a long way. We've done well so far. For the timekeepers, where are we at?
So it looks like the plaintiff has 20 minutes and 23 seconds remaining, and defense has 24 minutes and 23 seconds remaining.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for timekeeping. All righty. Let's see here. So we will go ahead and start with the plaintiff closing whenever you are ready.
May it please the court. He's never coming home. Not I hope he comes home. Not I pray he still comes home. He's never coming home. Those are the words of the defendant. A woman who combined divorce, desperation, and deception into a deadly combination that she used to kill Lou Donaldson. Members of the jury, Lou Donaldson was far from a perfect man. In fact, you might have heard some things today that you didn't like about him. But Lou was somebody's dad. And nobody deserves to lose their dad. I mean, this was a man who went from used cars to multi-million-dollar businesses. All he wanted in his life was somebody to share it with. But when he married the defendant, he realized eventually that was a mistake. But the bigger mistake was when he told her he wanted a divorce. Because when he said that word, he created a very scared and desperate woman. A woman whose desperation would turn to violence. And members of the jury, let's clear something up. Ms. Harmon and I, we're not state prosecutors, and this isn't a murder trial. We can't put the defendant behind bars, no matter how much she may deserve to be there. Like Ms. Harmon explained, we're here today representing Lou's only surviving son, Cam Donaldson. And Cam, he's not just here for some money, he's here for his dad. He's here because for 8 years, he's never stopped searching for his dad. He's been searching for the truth, and now he's found it. He knows the truth that this defendant is the reason his dad never came home. Today, members of the jury, Cam's search for the truth, it comes to an end. Today, he's searching for justice. Like Ms. Harmon explained, this is a very special kind of case called wrongful death. And what that means is throughout today's trial, we've proven 4 elements. That Lou Donaldson is dead. That it was the defendant who intentionally caused his death. That those damages are a result of the defendant's actions. Let's take a moment to talk about those elements. Let's talk about the burden that we had in this case. You see, the judge is going to give you some instructions in just a moment. He'll tell you that it's okay to think there are some possibilities in this case. But at the end of the day, if you think it's more likely than not that this defendant is the reason Lou Donaldson didn't come home, then your responsibility is to hold her liable. Let's start with that first element, the obvious. Lou Donaldson is dead. The defendant told us herself, he's never going to come home. Nobody's seen him. Nobody's heard from him since the day he disappeared. The defendant even had him declared legally dead. And why would she do that if she thought he was still alive? You know, this case, it really comes down to the answer to one simple question. Why? Why did this defendant kill Lou Donaldson? And to understand the answer to that question, we have to start at the divorce. You see, Lou, he wasn't just anybody. He was a man who took this defendant in at her time of need. And he built her a multi-million-dollar lifestyle that most of us just could only dream about. That's why when he said that little word, divorce, the panic set in. The money, the houses, the cars, the cats, the animals, the sanctuary, the business, all of it was about to be taken from her. We learned today that she wouldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let him do that to her. That she didn't care what it took or who got hurt. Let's talk about the timeline in this case. On August 17th, Lou Donaldson was seen alive for the very last time by his son, Cam. It was at 6 p.m. And then 9 hours later, the defendant wants us to believe she was at the grocery store buying Tiger formula. Does that make sense, members of the jury? That while her husband was disappearing, that she happened to go out at 3 o'clock in the morning to some grocery store that happened to be open, and that just so happened to sell Tiger formula? I mean, you saw the bank records in this case. They bought $1,000 of animal supplies the day before. And now 3 o'clock in the morning, they're already out. She wants us to believe she just happened to leave her cell phone at home, so we can't track her. She claims that a stranger decided to pull off the road in the middle of the night to let her use the cell phone. And then she doesn't call her husband. Members of the jury, does that make sense? You see, it's not just bad luck. It's not just strange circumstances. It's not just some weird events. It's called evidence. It's evidence that this defendant hasn't been truthful with us today. It's evidence that she wasn't out at some grocery store at 3 in the morning buying Tiger formula. What she was really doing was making sure her husband wouldn't come home. And then think about what happens next. Only 36 hours after her husband is seen for the last time, she's already up at the business, going into Cam's office, taking Lou's safe, and most importantly, stealing his will. Let's stop and think about that for a moment. At that point, the defendant, she already claimed that Lou was missing. She admitted that at the very beginning of this case. But she told us today, well, he would take off on business trips all the time, just hop on a plane and go, not tell her, not call her, and he'd be gone for days at a time, certainly longer than 36 hours. That this happened over and over and over and over again throughout their years of marriage. And not one time when he left like that did she ever report him missing the very next day. So what was different this time? Why was it this time she chose not to wait? Why was it this time that 36 hours in, she's already getting his will? Members of the jury, it's because she already knew. It's because she knew he wouldn't come home. Not this time. You know, she claimed he was missing, but guess what, members of the jury? She didn't call him. She certainly didn't search for him. Is that really what a grieving, concerned spouse does when their husband leaves? It's not. I mean, members of the jury, she was so desperate to get after that will, to get after it so quickly, because she knew. She knew that for her plan to work, it had to end in deception. Deception. You see, the will we saw today, That's not Lou Donaldson's will. That will is a forgery. And we brought you an expert here to explain why, but frankly, members of the jury, you didn't need an expert to tell you that the signature on there is not real. Just look at it yourself. Look at those O's at the end of Donaldson, members of the jury. Lou Donaldson didn't write that will. Somebody else did. That will wasn't made on June 14th. It was made after he was dead. The deception, it didn't end there, members of the jury. I mean, let's think about what the defendant told us today. She wants us to believe that Lou Donaldson left her, that he changed his will to give her all the money because he wanted to make sure she could keep feeding the cats and keep the cats alive. But let's really think about that for a second and see if it makes any sense. You see, she had him declared legally dead 5 years after his disappearance, the fastest she could. So for 5 straight years, she couldn't get to that money in the will. She couldn't get that life insurance policy. She wants you to believe that Lou's plan was to take care of her, but also to up and leave her stranded dry for 5 years until she could get the money. Members of the jury, it doesn't make sense because it isn't true. They're alleging that Lou Donaldson flew away to somewhere that night, but nobody saw him near an airplane. Airplane that anyone knows about Lou owning at the time, well, it's still sitting in the hangar right now with the wheels on the ground. There's no evidence he came even close to a plane that night. You see, the story, it doesn't make sense because it's not true. The members of the jury, you're not just here to determine whether this is responsible. Your job is also to determine for how much. And look, we understand it's just impossible to put a cost on a human life. But just think, members of the jury, how much would just one more day with his dad be worth to Cam Donaldson? Would seeing his dad for just one more day, would it be worth $100 for that day? $1,000? How many days would he have left? Members of the jury, that's for you to decide today. Now, in a few moments, the defendant's attorney, she's going to come up here and give her last words in this case. As she does, I want you to keep in mind the words of her own defendant. Remember, after all this happened, when she went to Exotic Bob and she said, "I'll do to you exactly as I did to my husband. I will feed you to the cats just like I did him." Remember when she came to us today and she said, "He's never coming home." Members of the jury, at the beginning of this case, Ms. Harmon asked you to keep 3 questions in mind. Who was afraid of divorce? Who was desperate to keep her lifestyle? And who was it that resorted to deception? At the end of this trial, the evidence is clear. There's only one answer to that question, and it's the defendant. You see, members of the jury, when she looked at us today and she said, "He's never coming home," she knew she was telling us the truth because she made sure of it herself. That's why when you go back into this deliberation room, when you return and when you announce your verdict to the world, all that we ask is that you give us a verdict that's supported by the law, that you give us a verdict that's supported by the facts of this case. Members of the jury, we ask that your verdict does justice by Lou Donaldson and that you hold this defendant liable. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, counsel. And for the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the jury, in 2012, Karen Baja and Lou Donaldson were having marital problems. In June, Lou Donaldson decided that he wanted Karen out of his life. He even told her he wanted a divorce. But that would take too long. He wanted out now. The only option left for him was to get into one of his planes and take off. But Lou couldn't take off immediately. There was something holding him back. His beloved cats. The tigers and lions and leopards at Wild Wildlife, they depended on him. But not only that, he loved them. If he were to leave, he needed to ensure that they were taken care of. There was only one person who was both as passionate about those animals as Lou, but also, and even more importantly, capable of taking care of them. Not only had the practice of doing so for over 11 years, but knew what it took to take care of those animals on a day-to-day basis. That was Karen Baja. When Lou decided that he was out of his marriage, he wrote his will. He knew he wasn't going to come back, so he planned ahead. He chose specific language. He chose the phrase, "Should I die or disappear?" He also chose the phrase, "I leave to Karen Baja all of my real and personal property whatsoever." He knew that no matter what, with that language in place, with him gone, those cats would be in the care and custody of Karen Baja. Today, the plaintiff is bringing a wrongful death suit against Karen Baja because his father's plan did not include him. Members of the jury, to prove wrongful death, the plaintiff has the burden of proving to you that it's more likely than not that Karen Baja's intentional or reckless conduct caused Lou Donaldson's death. Not only has the plaintiff been unable to point to any specific conduct from Karen Baja, but his entire assertion in this case is based on a story that the plaintiff has made up. The plaintiff has not met his burden of proof. Disappearance is not death. Accusations are not evidence. Members of the jury, what does it tell you about the plaintiff's case that the last piece of evidence that they chose to show you is a video about someone talking who they didn't even tell you who he was, why he's relevant, or why he's credible? You saw that man for yourself. Do you think that he's credible? They needed that evidence because there's nothing else there. You heard the plaintiff testify that Karen Baja broke into her own office to steal a lockbox that apparently had another will in it. It was apparently the only copy of that alleged will. Members of the jury, that story didn't happen. Miss Baja has keys to the Wild Wildlife office. Why would she need to break into her own business at 6 o'clock in the morning? That doesn't make any sense because it didn't happen. The plaintiff himself couldn't even make sense of that story on the stand. The plaintiff is arguing that on the one hand, Miss Baja is clever enough to kill Lou Donaldson, hide his body, leave no evidence behind, forge a will that it is so good that it gets past an expert with over 20 years of experience determining whether or not life insurance claims should be paid out. But at the same time, Karen Baja is also incompetent enough to break into her own office at 6 a.m., set off an alarm that she knew would be there, and get caught red-handed with some lockbox. None of what the plaintiff is saying makes sense. Not only that, none of that has been proven. In fact, the plaintiff has not even proven that Lou Donaldson is dead. Members of the jury, you cannot accept the plaintiff's testimony as it relates to seeing Karen Baja on the premises of Wild Wildlife at 6 o'clock in the morning and this alleged lockbox story. There's absolutely no evidence that another will even existed or that this alleged event even took place. Members of the jury, the plaintiff testified that a lock was cut. at the front entrance of Wildwood Life. He didn't see the defendant cut that lock. He testified that someone else was there with Ms. Baja. He can't tell us who that is or provide any evidence to that. He said that police officers were on site and came right after he arrived on the scene. Yet he's presented no evidence of a police report. He has asked no police officer to come and testify as to what happened that day. How could he? It didn't happen. The plaintiff also testified that Ms. Baja was holding the lockbox and that the lockbox was held in his desk drawer. The plaintiff did not testify that there was any damage done to his desk, the drawer, or the lock on the desk drawer. You heard my co-counsel ask Cam Donaldson about this on the stand. Once he realized that his story wasn't added up, he tried to change his tune. He gave very specific answers about there being no damage to the drawer, the lock on the drawer, or the desk. But then when pressed on it again, he started to say he didn't remember. It's because he knew his story wasn't adding up. The plaintiff offers no explanation as to why Ms. Baja, an owner of Wild Wildlife, would choose to damage her own property. That story doesn't make sense because it didn't happen. This is only one example of a false story that the plaintiff has told you today and asked you to believe as the truth. Another example is that the plaintiff is asking you to believe that his father only had one pair of glasses over a time span of 20 years. Not only has the plaintiff not established that Ms. Baja's conduct caused Lou Donaldson's death, he also has not established that Ms. Baja's conduct caused any injury to him. Members of the jury, the plaintiff has based his case on a will. This is Lou Donaldson's will. The plaintiff is not in the will, and we know why. Because Lou Donaldson only trusted Karen Baja to have custody of the big cats at Wild Wildlife. You heard the plaintiff testify today about his responsibilities at Wild Wildlife. He ran the books, he ran the finances, he signed checks, he answered phones. He didn't look after the cats. In his own words, that was Karen's job. Karen told you herself today on the stand how big of a job that is. It requires 24/7 around the clock care. And not only that, it is so niche and specialized that you cannot just train someone up to be able to do that. Lou Donaldson knew this. He worked with both Cam Donaldson and Karen Baja. He was aware that if he was to leave Wild Wildlife, it could only be in the hands of Karen Baja for those animals to be cared for. And that's why he chose the language he did in this will. Members of the jury, you heard the plaintiff in closing talk about what Ms. Baja didn't do after Lou Donaldson disappeared. But the plaintiff did not address the fact that the plaintiff didn't do any of those things either, not one. After his father disappeared, the plaintiff took no action for 5 years. Cam Donaldson told you himself on cross-examination, he did not take any action until he knew that he wasn't in his father's will. He didn't take action until money was on the line. It wasn't until then that he hired Taylor Pride. He hired Miss Pride because if he was to get what he wanted, the only way he could do that was by painting the will as a forgery. Why didn't he hire a private investigator after his father disappeared? Why would the plaintiff wait 5 years? There's only one clear answer for that question, and it's money. You heard Chris Renner testify as an expert in handwriting analysis and forensic document examination. He investigated Lou Donaldson's last will and testament. Members of the jury, Mr. Renner is the only unbiased witness that you have heard testify today. Keep that in mind when you are considering his testimony. He recommended, after analyzing the will, the signature, and the document as a whole, that Summit Life Insurance should pay out the life insurance policy to Karen Baja because the document is authentic. I asked him, would he have done that if he had any hesitation as to either the signature or the document itself? He said if he doubted that they were authentic, he would not have made that recommendation. That's not the only expert you heard today. You also heard the plaintiff's private investigator testify. Ms. Pride is an investigator by trade and a forensic document examiner. She told us on the stand here today that the only formal handwriting analysis education that she has received was a 2-week seminar. It was 18 years ago. Yet, what is the only testimony that Ms. Pride offered on the stand here today? It's about handwriting analysis. Now, also, aside from her lack of credentials, Ms. Pride clearly does not know her client. Cam Donaldson testified on cross-examination that his father owned multiple planes. Yet, on direct, Ms. Pride asserted that he only owned one. The plaintiff in closing put emphasis on the fact that that one plane is still in a hangar. This is another example of the plaintiff's inconsistencies on their story. After no word from Lou Donaldson for 5 years, Karen Baja declared Lou Donaldson dead. She had to move on with her life, and she has. She's been running Wild Wild Life on her own for 8 years. Those tigers and lions and leopards that Lou and she loved so much, they're in great hands. They're well cared for, just how Lou wanted it. But today, the plaintiff is attacking that because of his greed. Members of the jury, disappearance is not death. Accusations are not evidence. The plaintiff is grasping at straws and falsely accusing Karen Baja of murder because he is upset that his father left and that his father's plan didn't include him. Think about what the plaintiff has put on today in their case. The plaintiff is degrading Ms. Baja by asking her about the age difference between her and Lou Donaldson and asserting that she was motivated by fear. Members of the jury, Ms. Baja wasn't fearful, and she was not desperate. Members of the jury, the plaintiff in this case has the burden of proof. Rendering a verdict for the plaintiff means that they have proven all of the elements for you here today. They have not. They have not proven that Lou Donaldson is dead. Having Lou Donaldson declared legally dead, they haven't added any new additional information as to that, and Lou Donaldson could very well still be alive. Second, the death of Lou Donaldson was caused by the defendant's intentional reckless conduct. That's what they need to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence. They have not done so. And fourth, the plaintiff has not proven that the defendant's conduct caused injury to Cam Donaldson. If Cam Donaldson is upset that Ms. Baja fired him, turning around and filing a wrongful death suit is not the proper way to go about handling that situation. Members of the jury, if you find that even one or more of these elements has not been proven by a preponderance of the evidence, you must render a verdict for the defendant. Render a verdict that the defendant is not liable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, counsel. And rebuttal, how much time do we have left?
We have 6 minutes and 8 seconds left for
Perfect.
rebuttal.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
36 hours. 36 hours. Lou Donaldson went missing, and 36 hours later, this defendant went to get his will. Members of the jury, there's only one reason on this earth to go get somebody's will. It's because you know they're dead. You see, there's a reason that this defendant never called Lou. There's a reason she never looked for Lou. There's a reason she never grieved for Lou. It's because she knew. It's because she made sure that Lou Donaldson, well, he's never coming home. Hold her liable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, that concludes round 2 of the Summit Cup, everyone. Really well done. I'm always so impressed with the advocacy in these tournaments. So we are not to give feedback. Now you will get my notes and all the other jurors' notes later. So I think that's it. I think I get to release you guys and get some rest before tomorrow. And really well done.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Your
so
Honor.
much.
Bye. Good luck.
Awesome round, guys. Thank you.